Question number 4, Phil Twyford.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
My question is for the Minister for Building and Housing. Does he stand by his statement that non-resident foreign buyers in the Auckland housing market are a non-event? And if so, on what empirical data does he base that on?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, my full statement was, we know from the IED data that the number of non-resident taxpayers with income or losses from rental properties has not changed in 5 years and is a non-event. The actual number is 25,000 as compared to the 1.75 million homes in New Zealand, or about 2%. This number also includes a large number of New Zealand citizens and residents who live offshore but own a home in New Zealand. I do not share the member's view that people with Chinese-sounding names are the root cause of our housing problem.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
What are the advantages to New Zealanders, if any, of allowing non-resident foreigners to trade our houses for capital?
Order. Order. There was order. I'm going to invite the member to ask that question again. There was a lot of interjection here. I didn't hear the tail end of the question.
So much.
Phil Twyford, supplementary question.
What are the advantages to New Zealanders, if any, of allowing non-resident foreigners to trade our houses for capital gain?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The consistent advice that I've had from the Productivity Commission, from the Treasury and from my own ministry is that overseas buyers are not having a significant effect on house prices. I also note that in Sydney they have had a greater house price inflation than Auckland, despite controls of the sort the member proposes. I do not think a policy of allowing foreign property speculation from Australia but banning it from China, as Labor proposes, is a principled policy. I think it is something a lot less.
Point of order, Phil Twyford.
It was a very straight question.
I'm going to invite
the advantages.
The question was about the advantages. I'll invite the member to ask the. No, I'll invite Phil Twyford to ask the question again, so it's absolutely clear to the minister.
What are the advantages to New Zealanders, if any, of allowing non-resident foreigners to trade our houses for capital gain?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, I was in Auckland last night and actually met with a number of overseas interests that are buying and building significant number of new homes for Auckland, and given the supply challenge that we have, actually that investment helps us address those supply issues.
Supplementary question, Alfred Nardo.
E te manawa te whakawā. My question is to the Minister for Building and Housing. What reports has the Minister seen on the claim that the Auckland housing problem is the fault of people with Chinese-sounding names?
Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, I've seen many reports disputing that people with Chinese-sounding names are to blame for housing affordability and the 30-year decline in home ownership. The Race Relations Conciliator called it shameful scapegoating. The listener said it was demonising one ethnic group on highly questionable data, and said that it was only different in scale to that which occurred in Nazi Germany. We saw, that's what the listener said.
Order.
We also saw Labor Party members resigning as a consequence, and we saw others that were very disappointed that Andrew Little has become the Pauline Hanson of New Zealand politics.
Order. 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 Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Why won't he back the vast majority of New Zealanders, including the majority of National Party voters, who want a ban on foreign buyers, or is he right and they're all wrong?
Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, the member himself does not support a ban on all foreign buyers. He has said that he actually supports Australians being able to speculate on the New Zealand market. which shows how shallow and opportunist members opposite policy is.
And racist.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Does he take responsibility after 7 years in government for the fact that banks approved 3 times as many mortgages for investors as they did for first home buyers?
Order, order. The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, what that data showed was that 33% of new mortgages were granted to people that were investing in property. That's not surprising given that 35% of homes in New Zealand are rented. What I do take responsibility for is doubling the rate of house build, and I draw attention to the pipeline report yesterday that shows with this government's policies 80,000 new homes are to be built in Auckland over the next 6 years, and that's where this government sees the solution lying.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Is he concerned that a couple who, according to the New Zealand Herald, are listed on the electoral roll as students, amassed Auckland property worth $26 million and gave $370,000 to the National Bank?
Order. There, that last part of that question makes it entirely out of order. Question, no.
We're not going to base our policy on...
Order. I'm inviting the member. I was quite happy to rule the question right out, but the minister obviously wants to answer the first part of then the question's out of order. Question. Order. Order. I have a point of order from the Honourable David Parker.
On what basis is that question ruled out of order under standing orders?
Order. I would have... Order. I'm happy to explain. The Minister for Building and Housing is not responsible for any donations to a political party. Order. I just want to be clear with the member.
Yep.
If this is a fresh point of order,
It is a fresh point of order. It is a fresh point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Fresh point of order.
And it may be something that you want to consider and come back to the House on, and that is that members often ask ministers questions about, with reference to matters that they are not directly responsible for, but that have a relevance on their responsibility. And a donation to a party, while the minister may not be responsible for it, can actually have relevance to the minister's portfolio.
The member is now skating on very thin ice. Well, I assure the member he is. We're relitigating a point. Political donations occur. We all know they do. But a Minister of the Crown is not responsible for political donations to a political party. And there are order, I'm on my feet. And there are many Speaker's rulings confirming that. Further point of order. Now, again, I just want to be clear because I've got to treat everybody in this House absolutely fairly.
No, I accept.
Is it a fresh point of order?
It is, sir. Yes,
Yeah,
I accept your ruling.
The Honourable David Parker.
Yes, I accept your ruling, sir. And I would ask that the same level of sitting down ministers is applied when the ministers refer to things that they have no responsibility for, which is Labor Party policy. It's the same rule.
And order, and I will do my best to do so when I see order. I have a very good mind to be asking Chris Farfoy to leave the chamber on that basis. Very good mind indeed. Order. In answer to the point raised by the Honourable David Parker, I attempt to do my best. I may miss on the odd occasion, but I will certainly do my best to make sure that when a minister blatantly brings in an opposition's political policies, I'll do my best to shut that down. Question number 5, Paul Foster Bell.